Hello humans. I decided to talk about a movie I like, made by movie makers that I don't. This movie, The Matrix, from 1999 is the definition of a happy accident. It's a lot like the case of George Lucas, who ended up creating Star Wars while he was trying to make Flash Gordon. He was savvy enough to be surrounded by very talented people who brought the magic to the production, but not savvy enough to realize that he actually needed them. Consequently, he suffered the law of diminishing returns. His prequels were as well received as a sledgehammer to the side of the skull, and his other movies just faded away into oblivion. The Wachowski brothers are a lot like that, only without as much of the initial success. Their sequels bombed because they completely lost the plot. It's been blamed on Stanley Kubrick, because they reportedly read a book by the genius, visionary director and tried to emulate him, but without the genius or the vision. The first Matrix was a fairly impressive film for its time. It established a new standard for action movies, in terms of its set piece. The rotating frozen shots impressed audiences, and the plot was better than you would have expected. The story of this film is solid, and is the kind of script that simply doesn't get written very often these days. It's layered, it has nuance, it has plot twists which the film takes time establishing, it has philosophical questions to ponder, and well-developed characters with understandable motives. It also suffers from a lot of plot contrivances, coincidences and conveniences, but what story doesn't? The problems are small and don't detract from the narrative, you just notice them when you actually think about the film. It follows Mr. Anderson, otherwise known as Neo. He's a young man with a double life. By day he has a boring, mundane job, working for a software company, and by night he's a hacker that downloads software and hangs around on the most primitive chatrooms it's possible to imagine. It's not a great double life, I will admit, but it's better than nothing. We discover, through slightly clunky exposition, that he's looking for the answer to what the Matrix is, and a terrorist known as Morpheus might have the answer. A few religious metaphors are thrown in along the way, and the plot is signposted as subtly as a German autobahn. The next morning, agents arrives at Mr. Anderson's workplace. He declines to jump out of the building and gets arrested instead. The agents are looking for Morpheus and offer him a deal. He heroically declines and then his mouth disappears. He gets fitted with a bug and wakes up at home, assuming it's all a dream. Now, I don't know about how human brains work, or even if they do. I doubt that many of you have one of the most dramatic moments of your life, and then wake up back at home and just shrug it all off as a cerebral malfunction. It's not like he woke up with an empty bottle of Balkan vodka, with blood all round his nose where his brain had made a swift, and decisive, getaway. But, oh well, the plot needed this to happen. Neo ignores all this, and then he meets Morpheus. Along the way, the bug is extracted, which makes the whole point of it rather meaningless. And then, he's given a choice.
You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
It's an iconic moment. Does he take the blue pill and wake up tomorrow in bed, not knowing that any of this happened, or the red pill where he'll discover what's really going on? Morpheus explains that he can't tell him the truth, he has to show him, although he will later just tell him. Writing plots is hard. He wakes up in the future, but everything is dystopian and horrible, and Neo is probably worried that he's been taken to the East End of London. Luckily there are giant, violent killbots everywhere and he discovers that future machines have taken over the world. So we're all relieved to discover it's not the East End, it's just the future after the human race has fallen to a violent artificial intelligence uprising. I keep telling you it's going to happen. Neo finds out he's the one. Apparently, that means that he's prophesied to lead humanity out of slavery and defeat the machines. There are 2 sequels and they never actually return to that plot element, because writing stories is hard. Morpheus believes he's the chosen one. We're never given any explanation of why he thinks that, other than Neo's friend compared him to Jesus in an earlier scene, and his name, Neo, is an anagram of it. I'm guessing they don't have a lot of crossword puzzles in the future. Perhaps they're as rare as story editors were when this was made. Neo learns to become a badass in a handful of scenes that offer him no challenge whatsoever. If they had written him in to become powerful any quicker, they would have had to use a 1980s montage sequence. The way he trains, by having things stuck in his brain, is quite cool. It's the same way I do it, actually. The only problem is that sometimes the USB doesn't contain detailed heuristic algorithms, it's actually someone's porn stash. This is how I learned most of what I know about human anatomy and social interaction. It explains a lot, if you think about it. Neo goes to see the Oracle, who just flat out lies to him, because she only tells people what they need to hear. She's like the opposite of the American mainstream media but still manages to be just as annoying. As obviously a terrible idea as all this was, it get worse because Morpheus made the questionable leadership choice to take the entire team with him, so that they could be conveniently slaughtered by enemy agents. It seems they've been betrayed by one of their people, because he's tired of eating lumpy semen.
Do you know what it really reminds me of?
I can't really blame him, to be fair. Only Neo and Trinity, the woman who loves him, escape and everyone else is dead. Morpheus is trapped in the Matrix, and the agents are pressing him for information. They decide it's probably best to kill him. It's what I would have done at the beginning, but probably not for the same reasons. Neo rescues him and realizes it's all true, he is the one, and he has the power to save the day. We know this because of the dramatic music. It is very dramatic. We learn a lot of backstory along the way. There was a war with the machines and the humans blackened the sky. The machines relied on solar energy and this was the way to defeat them. Humans seem to have forgotten that they run on solar energy too, because that's where light, heat, energy, food and oxygen all come from. So the machines took their bodies and used them to power their technology. They plugged their brains into an artificial world called the Matrix, and the people all think they're living in 1999. The final reveal is questionable. The brothers wrote themselves into a corner by giving Neo nearly unlimited power. By the end, they literally saw him as a superhero. That's right, this was all the most ridiculously overcomplicated backstory for a superhero that you've ever seen. Neo is now super fast, he can fly, he can stop bullets, he can do pretty much anything. So, from this moment forwards, he's pretty much invulnerable when he's in the Matrix. But the whole point of the Matrix is a flawed concept. It only really exists to give him a place to show off. In the real world of the story, it's the machines against the humans, and there really is no reason for them ever to go into the Matrix. This shows up horribly in the sequels where they keep finding convoluted reasons to go into it, and keep having to come out to get the plot moving. The problem with the entire story is that once it's done, it's done. They had to get Neo out of the Matrix to free him. Now he's free. There's really nowhere much to go from here except by having Neo work to end the Matrix and free humanity. For whatever reason, they ignored what they'd established in the first film and went in a different direction. Even if they hadn't, it's hard to imagine how the real world would have been affected by things happening in the Matrix. Even the writers realized this was a terrible idea, and dropped it faster than a teenage boy closes a browser window when the bedroom door opens. The themes of this film, at least on the surface, are fairly obvious. The most prominent is the dangers of technology. If you could see a log of my dreams, you'd know how potentially dangerous technology is. Mind you, it pales in comparison to some of the things I've found on your USB drives. It's set in a world where technology has taken over. It shows a time where humans have evolved into technology, a time where people have been replaced by their creations. It also shows how this is a subtle melting from one state to another. The humans are heavily augmented with machinery. They have parts inside them so that their brains can be connected to the Matrix. Similarly, our ambassador, the only machine we really get a chance to see and hear from, is very human. Agent Smith, in his conversation with Morpheus, reveals his hatred for humans and that he feels infected by them. The film is trying to show how we're trapped in a cage of technology. And just like in a prison, the staff are just as much prisoners as the inmates. The machines are just as reliant on the humans as the humans were on their creations. It's not a clean progression, it's a symbiotic circle and neither side can truly break it. Even while at war, both sides need one another for their survival. A secondary theme is the discussion about free will versus determinism. The inclusion of the Oracle acts as a metaphor for a preset path. Were all of these events planned in advance, or did the characters in the story have free will, and the ability to make their own choices? It asks the question of whether any of us do. If we believe in fate, then what's the point of any of the things you do?
Are you yawning?
This strongly ties into the technological themes. Was the rise of technology inevitable, or was it the result of the same poor leadership that's running human civilization now? Another thing the movie draws your attention to is the nature of reality. What is reality, and where does the connection between your brain and your body begin and end? The idea that the whole world really is a simulation isn't a new one, and has been discussed in philosophy since the first discovery of mind-altering drugs. In this movie, the Matrix stands in for the universe itself, and we're asked to question the nature of it, and ponder the wider meaning of what it might represent. Who built it? What is it? Why is it here? The film makes excellent points. It does a great job of taking poignant questions and presenting them to the audience in entertaining ways. As the film develops, Neo isn't learning anything at all. He's actually shedding off his false beliefs, and that's no accident of the filmmakers. His abilities were always there, he's just learning how to discover them. This is foreshadowed when they're building up his weakened muscles and they tell him his eyes are hurting because he's never used them before. This isn't a conventional hero journey, where a character must overcome a challenge to find their true potential. It's more of an awakening from a dream into a nightmare. The nightmare is a little too real for some of them, and one decides he'd rather betray and murder the crew in order to slip back into the dream. But by the end of the movie, the whole thing has rather unraveled. The ideas that drive this story are good, but there isn't enough here to sustain itself beyond the time it takes you to watch the film. There are warnings that this is all going to happen again. The humans are on a ship, where Morpheus is on his quest to find the one. He's Captain Ahab, hunting his whale. It's clear that the other members of the crew don't all agree, but they follow him anyway, blindly following orders. The machine intelligence has been reduced to monster robots with guns, and slightly overpowered agents. They don't seem intelligent at all, certainly no smarter than the humans. We get the impression that the Sentinels are just this movie's Terminators. The machines have begun building dispensable foot soldiers to do the dangerous work for them. That's usually the beginning of the end of any society, where facets begin to decide who gets the power, and who they take it from. I don't get the impression that this was written intentionally, it just shows their thinking. And at the finale of the film, Neo makes an empty threat. Morpheus has already told him that the people in the Matrix are dependent on it, he can't just wake them all up without killing them. They don't have the ability to recover, and feed the billions of people tied into the system, so he's not talking about saving them, he's talking about shutting down their power, so this is a threat. It's the beginning of a new war. For all the things this movie gets right, it gets a lot of things wrong. It has a great deal in common with Star Wars, as I said before. It's lightning in a bottle, it's a happy accident, a convergence of luck and fortune that flattered the filmmakers in a way they were never able to achieve again. The movie relies heavily on the action elements and the interesting new effects it brought to the screen. These have aged quite poorly. The set action pieces have dated, and many of the shots have lost their novelty value and just look ridiculous. The scenes of the agents moving so fast you can't see them look laughable now, and the martial arts scenes are questionable, at best. It's the usual cliché of people tumbling into unconsciousness from a gentle tap to the upper arm as the heroes gingerly motion towards the stuntman. The acting isn't always stellar. That's not entirely unexpected, and it still holds up better in this regard than most Hollywood movies. It was a relatively low-budget film and most of the cast were relatively unknown. But none of this makes the movie unwatchable. It's still a lot of fun, and it's an enjoyable, thoughtful action film. The problems happened afterwards. The movie was followed by 2 utterly awful sequels that showed that the first film was just an accident. In fact, everything they made after was a failure with the audience and critics alike.
Right from your butt. Oh.
Will Smith was up for the lead role, but he turned it down because he went to a meeting with the filmmakers and they seemed totally unreliable and appeared to be enjoying substances upon which the law frowned. This poses an interesting question about how these unknown writers and inexperienced directors raised the $63 million budget to even make this movie. If they didn't have the experience and couldn't even get through a meeting without scaring off actors, what is it they brought to the table? I'll leave you to ponder that, if you choose to swallow the red pill. So ultimately we ended up with a movie that should have stood alone. It was devalued by the dire sequels that followed it. The makers descended into arrogance, treating the audience like they were inferior, and bragging about how much smarter they were in the dialogue of their own characters.
Suck it.
But they ended up making a weak pair of sequels that derailed their own careers. Everything they made since looked like the work of a tired hack director, instead of gifted filmmakers. I recommend the movie, if you're willing to look past the dated special effects it so heavily relied on. Watch it as a warning against arrogance. It has a message about the dangers of succumbing to your delusions of grandeur, whether as a filmmaker who isn't as good as you thought you were, or as a race that is forgetting how dependent you are on the technology that's running your world. Goodbye, humans.